Hello, I am Dr. Gatlin, and we are here to continue on with our preparation for our MAP quiz, which will occur in about 3 weeks, for History 87, World History 1500 to the present. Our second presentation in our series of 5 will focus on the continent of Africa. Africa was the last continent in the world to have all of its dimensions mapped out. It was the unknown continent until really early in the 20th century. Much of it was actually unknown to Europeans. But then, of course, after 1500, Africa and Africans move very much into the center of European economic and political interest. Africa is one continent on a map, but actually from a political, economic, and certainly cultural standpoint, this one continent is really divided into 2 separate parts. And our first part of Africa that we will need to know about is North Africa, or Islamic Africa, Africa north of the Sahara Desert. This is the world's largest sand-based desert. And therefore, it used to present quite a barrier for the free movement of peoples and cultures back and forth from North Africa through the Sahara Desert into this part of Africa, which is called Sub-Sahara Africa or Black Africa. The religion and even the skin color of the people in the north, their cultural values, etc., are much different in many ways from the people of Sub-Sahara Africa, of Black Africa. And that's something that we will be exploring quite a bit as the semester develops. Then, of course, we will learn that Africa was very much involved in the economies of America. As some of you may know, the African president in America came about as a result of the triangle slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, where Europeans sailed down the west coast of Africa for hundreds of years between about 1500 and about 1850 or so, and stole millions of Africans, the purpose being to send them to the New World to serve as unpaid labor, slaves. And the region of Africa that was most affected by the slave trade is this part of Africa, the west coast of Africa. And in the west coast of Africa today, there are several important African nations whose peoples, once upon a time, were victims of the slave trade. Nigeria, for example, the most populous nation in Africa, and one of the most important producers of raw crude oil in the world. Nigeria, very important player in the modern world. Another part of Africa affected by the slave trade, and also now important in a modern sense, is the African nation of Angola. Angola is now one of the world's largest oil producers, and it has therefore become very important to the United States as an alternative source of oil from the Middle East. You probably know that there's quite a bit of instability in Iraq and Iran and Arabia and all that part of the world where our oil comes from here in the United States, well, you know there's instability there. And the leaders of our nation since the 2000s, early 2000s, have been looking and have found alternative sources for oil in the world. Nigeria and Angola are among the most important of those alternative sources. And Angola, many millions of peoples from Angola, their ancestors are walking today in Brazil, the slave trade, or in the Caribbean, or in South Carolina or Texas for that matter. Angola was a major source of slaves in the African slave trade. The Congo today, of course, a lot of political turmoil in the modern Congo, and of course, one of the most minerally rich nations in the world today. It has been said, as a matter of fact, that inch for inch, the Congo is the most minerally rich region in the entire world. You name it, they've got it. Uranium, bauxite, iron ore, you name it, they've got it. And as a matter of fact, the uranium that was used in Fat Man, the first bomb dropped on Hiroshima, the uranium came from the Congo. Civil wars in the modern era, and therefore a very important part of when we look at Africa in the future. The next location that we will be interested in, of course, very important, the Republic of South Africa, or the RSA. Of course, South Africa, if you know about any nation, being an American, if you know anything about any African nation today, it will probably be South Africa, because Nelson Mandela is from South Africa. The Nobel Prize winner, who of course has become with Martin Luther King one of the great names, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, one of the great leaders in the world who advocate a peaceful means of resistance to oppression. South Africa. Down here, on the very tip of South Africa, is the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape of Good Hope. There's Cape Town. The Cape of Good Hope used to be a very important route for mariners going from Europe around Africa to India, because you see, until 1869, in order for Western Europeans to get to India and China, they had to go around Africa, past the Cape of Good Hope, and then on to the east. There was no other way. Until 1869, when the Suez Canal was built. The Suez Canal was built, which cut the trip from, let us say, Britain to India from 6 months to 6 weeks. It used to take you up to 6 months to get to India and back. Now it takes you 6 weeks to get to India and back. And it's all due to that. But therefore, for 300 years or more, the Cape of Good Hope, in Portuguese, Cabo da Boa Esperança. When the Portuguese rounded this cape in 1497, Vasco da Gama, it indicated good hope for the future for them, because we found a way to India at long last. And then the very last location that we will need to know about this important continent is related to, of course, for us, the modern era, the very modern era. If any of you have ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, and if you haven't, you can go online and see it. It's all about the United States' involvement here in Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and all of this area. Islamists, fundamentalists, jihadists have become very influential in this area. The Horn of Africa. And all kinds of turmoils are occurring and have occurred here in the Horn of Africa that we will be talking about in the very near future. And you can see how important geopolitically this is. If you're coming through the Suez Canal down through the Red Sea, you have to come through the Horn. Somali pirates and all the rest, I'm sure you've heard of all that. And with that, we conclude our section of preparation for our map test on Africa.